Brandon, Chapter 11. Mr. Roberts sat at his desk reading the report I'd brought him. I could feel sweat pouring down from my armpits. Oswald was so silent and still that I almost forgot he was there. I think he wanted to blend into the background so he wouldn't be noticed by Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts looked up from the report. This company has a very poor record. Not just poor, it's one of the worst in the world, I said. I'm very glad you brought this to my attention, Mr. Roberts said. I felt like giving Oswald a nudge. He was so worried that we'd be in trouble that we thought you'd want to know, Oswald said. Now I felt like making that nudge into a punch. I do appreciate it, Mr. Roberts said, but to be honest with you, I found out about this myself just a few days ago. You did? It was very distressing, Mr. Roberts said. I was very upset. It is upsetting. It's terrible, I exclaimed. I agree completely. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of work to do. He got to his feet and so did we. We shook hands. I was glad we told him. It was the right thing to do. There's so much I have to do to take care of these uniforms, said Mr. Roberts. I could just imagine the phone calls he'd have to make to cancel them and how upset people might be. I hope we can all get the uniforms distributed so that everybody will be wearing them on Monday, he said. What? I gasped. We're still going to be wearing the uniforms? Unfortunately, yes. Starting Monday as scheduled. But they're made in a sweatshop by child labor, I sputtered. Yes. It is unfortunate that they were not made by a more reputable company. Almost every company in the world is more reputable, I snapped. There's only 2 that are worse, and they don't make clothes. So what do you suggest we do? Mr. Roberts asked. I think we should get uniforms from another company. The board has a contract with this company to supply the uniforms. They've been paid for and delivered before anybody knew anything about this. Then maybe we should forget the uniforms and stay with regular clothes, I said. We can't do that either. Why not? You're the principal. You run the school. Just say we don't have to wear uniforms, I exclaimed. It isn't that simple, said Mr. Roberts. Sure it is. Just pick up the microphone and make an announcement. Ian, this decision was made at the board level by my bosses. I have no choice. But, I had no idea what more to say. Boys, I want you to know that I have pursued this at the top level of the board, and I've been assured that this company will never be used again. But we're still going to have to use them, have to wear them this year regardless, I asked. He nodded his head. I fully appreciate how difficult, how confusing, how unsettling this must be, but there is no choice. There are always choices, I snapped. He got up and circled around his desk and sat down on the edge right in front of us. I want to tell you boys that I'm pleased. No, more than that. Proud of you for wanting to take a stand against this, but you can't. I've been told that students or staff that do not wear the uniforms will be suspended. I'm not afraid of a suspension, I said. Maybe you should be, Mr. Roberts said. You've been suspended once before. A second suspension on your file could really affect your ability to get into a good university. I didn't know what to say. I didn't think it was fair or right for us to wear these uniforms, but I think you both know that I have high regard for you. I only want what's best for you, and because of that, I'm going to ask you to do me 2 favors. What do you want us to do? I asked. I want you to do nothing. First off, don't tell anybody. And second, please do not try to do anything about it. Can I have your word on that? Sure, that works for me, Oswald said. I didn't answer. Ian? I don't want to give you my word if I don't know that I can keep it. I got up to leave. Ian, I don't want you to do anything rash. I don't want to have to punish you, but you know that I'll do whatever I have to do, Mr. Roberts said. I understand that, I said, and maybe I have to do what I have to do. I walked out the door. I'd only gone a few feet when Oswald caught up to me. Okay, this is going to sound strange, especially coming from me, but don't do anything stupid, he said. I didn't say I was going to do anything, I replied. But you didn't say you weren't. How about if we both agree that we don't tell Julia anything about this? She would go crazy. Maybe we should tell her. That wasn't a suggestion. That was a warning. What good would it do to tell her? Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe not. I don't know what we should do. Who says we have to do anything? Oswald asked. The only people who know about this are me, you, and Mr. Roberts. I don't think he's going to be telling anybody. If we keep our mouths shut, who's going to know? I didn't know what to say to that. In one way, he wasn't wrong, but in another way, he was completely wrong because I knew. Why did I look at that website? Why did I notice who made the uniforms? Being ignorant and innocent would have been so much easier. Let's just keep it to ourselves for right now, Oswald suggested. My mother says you can't untell something once you've said it. That's good advice. Yeah, I'll even try to practice it myself this time. I just didn't expect that reaction from Mr. Roberts, I said. Neither did I, but really, what do you think he could do? Oswald asked. I thought he'd cancel the uniforms. The PA crackled to life. There was going to be an announcement. Could I have your attention, please? Mr. Roberts said. We stopped moving. Everybody in the hall stood still. I have an announcement to make about the school uniforms. Due to supply issues, Mr. Roberts continued, it may be that not every student will have a complete uniform by Monday. Every student and staff member will have received a jacket and tie. It is expected that everyone will wear those items. Any student or staff member not in uniform on Monday morning will not be admitted to the building and will be subject to a one-day suspension. No exceptions. Thank you, and have a good afternoon. Oswald and I looked at each other. There was no doubt. He knew, he understood, and he decided to ignore the whole thing. But could I ignore it? Julia always gave me a hard time that Mr. Roberts was my hero. Maybe in some ways he had been. Things change. Chapter 12. I slipped outside, quietly closing the door behind me. My parents had gone to bed and I didn't want to wake them. They would want to know where I was going at 11:30 at night, and I didn't have an answer. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to walk to try to clear my head. If I told them that, they would have wanted to know what was cluttering it, and I didn't want to tell them. I hadn't told anybody. Not Julia, not my parents, nobody. Oswald had sworn to do the same. Oswald and I had talked about it a lot, but that hadn't led to any answers, just more confusion. I walked along trying to make sense of what had happened, or, I guess, what hadn't happened. Oswald had told me that I'd expected too much from Mr. Roberts. He was right. I had expected something. He was the principal. He had taught us so much about social justice and becoming global citizens, about thinking globally and acting locally. Now it was more like think globally and do nothing locally. I felt so disappointed in him for doing nothing at all, and in me for not coming up with a plan. I guess it wasn't realistic to think Mr. Roberts would cancel the uniforms, that he could cancel the uniforms. It was cool, and I started to feel sprinkles coming from the sky. Great. It was going to start raining. If I started home right now, I could avoid getting completely soaked. I didn't need to feel as miserable on the outside as I did on the inside. When I got home, maybe I could talk to my parents about the whole thing. No, not tonight. They were asleep, and I wasn't going to wake them. Calling Oswald would mean just rehashing the same things again. That left Julia. Should I call her? Once I told her there was no way of getting the genie back in the bottle. She was like an avalanche, and once it started downhill, nothing could stop it. Stop it from doing what, though? I didn't have any better answer than I did 3 hours or 3 days or 3 weeks ago. The uniforms were going to happen, and it didn't matter where or how they were made. I was almost directly in front of our school. It was completely dark except for one window in the front of the building. Was that Mr. Roberts' office? He couldn't be in there working, could he? He did say he had a lot to do. I cut across the grass, and at that same instant the rain started to come down more heavily. The storm made the dark seem darker, and the light coming from the window brighter. It was definitely his office. I could tell by the big Dr. Martin Luther King quote on the wall. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It was Mr. Roberts' office, but was he there? He may have left the lights on, or the caretaker was cleaning his office. I crept through the bushes outside the window. I peeked in, and Mr. Roberts was sitting at his desk working. He looked up, saw me, and startled. His expression changed from shock to familiar as he recognized me. He motioned toward the front door. Go around, he mouthed. I waved and then headed for the door. It was, of course, locked, but at least I was out of the rain. Mr. Roberts came into the foyer. He walked over and pushed open the door. You startled me, he said. Sorry, I was just out walking and saw the light on and came over to see. I was startled, but I wasn't surprised, he said. You expected me to come here? I expected you to be troubled by what we talked about today. I nodded. You don't understand why I'm not doing anything about the uniforms. Again, I nodded. It might be different if the uniforms had been my idea to begin with, he said. They weren't your idea? No, they were the idea of some committee up at the board office. They see uniforms as a way of creating discipline and bringing order to a school. You don't think they do that? I asked. Do you think a Marine is a Marine only because of the uniform they wear? He asked. Of course not. Because if all they needed was a uniform, you'd just send recruits to a tailor instead of putting them through advanced training and giving them continual drills. That's what makes a Marine.